personal note, and one of the reasons I'm interested also in being here is beyond all of my academic and my research and my work. I'm a dad. I've got 2 little boys. I live in South Philadelphia, if you define it as south of South. If you define it as south of Washington, I'm just outside of South Philadelphia, which is why I was asking earlier. I had asthma as a kid. I know what it's like. It's not fun. It's really difficult to deal with, and so my heart goes out to every one of the 40% of the kids in some of these areas that have asthma. It's not an easy thing to deal with. I'm going to start with air quality kind of from a top-down perspective. Air quality in general is regional. When we have an air quality day in Philadelphia, it doesn't matter if you live next to the refinery or if you live in Center City or if you live in the suburbs, if you live in New Jersey. It's a bad air quality day for all of those people. It doesn't matter where you live on a bad air quality day. So Dr. Howarth mentioned getting the Air Now texts. Those tell you about the general regional air quality. And for a general regional perspective, the air quality is going to be bad everywhere in that region. And that's the reason for that is a lot of air quality is weather driven. Lower wind speeds keeps pollutants trapped closer to their sources, and you get higher concentrations. Rain is nature's cleaning mechanism. So a rainstorm helps wash all that pollution out of the air. After a rainstorm, the skies look bluer. You can see the skyline a little more clearly. That's the way nature cleans the air. Air quality in cities is typically worse than air quality in suburbs because there's more people, there's more activity, there's more driving, there's a higher concentration of industries. Restaurants are also a source of air pollution. You see that actually in most cities. And some neighborhoods, and this is specifically why we're here today, are even more impacted beyond the regional, the urban, down to the neighborhood level. Some neighborhoods in particular, next to the refinery, next to other industrial facilities, are going to be even more impacted by poor air quality. High traffic areas and, again, the refineries is one of the key things for us. This picture is actually from the airnow.gov website, and you can see this is a day in May of this year where the whole region from basically Washington, D.C. all the way up through Maine had a bad air quality day. This is what I was talking about when I was talking about regional. But if you drill down, there are certainly some areas in that are going to have worse air quality.
Can you say what that USG at the bottom means? The orange color is called USG?
Unsafe for sensitive groups.
Oh, thank you.
Not United States government, which is and just to kind of illustrate the way meteorology can have an effect, if you burn something when you're cooking, what do? You open your windows, you open your door, and you turn on a fan and try to blow the stuff out. Wind functions the same way. Higher wind speeds blows pollution away faster, so concentrations aren't as high. And so that's the other way that the weather helps raise air pollution. So I'm a data person. I like measurements. I like data. I want to know what's publicly available. I want to get it. I want to look at it. I want to try to understand it. That's what I do for my job, for my research. And it's fun for me. I don't know why. It just is. So I wanted to point out that there is publicly available data on PES. There's the emissions inventory for criteria pollutants. You can get this information from Philly AMS website. It has a list of the top 50 emitters in the city. It's stationary sources, so this again doesn't include the traffic or airport. Those have a lot of mobile sources. The toxic release inventory was mentioned by Dr. Howarth earlier. Oops, I meant to delete that part. Sorry. That's something you can get from the EPA's website, at least you still can currently. PES, through a consent decree with EPA and the Philadelphia Air Management Services, actually operates 2 monitoring sites. And I'll look at some of the data from that earlier, or later in the talk. And then there's also what are known as continuous emissions monitors. So those stacks that you see at the refinery actually have, for some species, chemical species, continuous monitoring of what's coming out of the stack. So those are all publicly available data sources that we can use and try to understand what the impacts from the refinery are on the local neighborhoods. I also want to point out that emissions inventories and stack emissions are how much is coming out, but that doesn't tell you what the concentration of those pollutants are at your home, in the air around your neighborhood. Those pollutants come out, mix with other air in the atmosphere, are chemically modified through reactions in the atmosphere, mix down to the neighborhood. So knowing the overall emissions is important, but also from a health perspective, we also think about what are the concentrations that we're breathing, because those are the things that really have the health impact. So it's not just how much is coming out, but how concentrated it is when it gets to you when you're breathing it in your home, outside your home, or in your neighborhood. So we heard, and we've talked about Philadelphia management, so from the Philadelphia management, the stationary source information from an emission inventories perspective, which emissions inventories are not super accurate, but they're accurate enough for us to get an idea of what the relative concentrations of different things are from different industries, the emissions. You look at the 2014 data in tons for some of what are called the criteria pollutants, SO2, sulfur dioxide, particulate matter, NOx, VOCs, carbon monoxide. You can look at Philadelphia Management Philadelphia Energy Solutions, which I hate that name, versus the rest of the sources, right? So of the total emissions from the top 100 stationary sources, 63% of the SO2 is emitted by the refinery, 75% of the PM2.5 from stationary sources again. NOx is 55%, 46% of the VOCs, and 76% of the carbon monoxide for stationary sources. Now traffic dwarfs some of those emissions, but I did kind of a back of the envelope calculation for particulate matter and NOx, which are things we care about for ozone and also for health. And it's roughly equivalent to 35,000 cars driving 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, just driving around in circles. So think about the refinery emissions in that scale. It's a lot of cars driving all day, all night. Toxic release inventory gives us information year to year, I would say estimates, on things that are emitted. So benzene, as Dr. Howarth mentioned, is type 1 carcinogen. It's not good. This is the estimates of benzene from the release from the toxic release inventory. There's actually two different colored greens there. I don't know if you can see them. The toxic release inventory, you can kind of see that there's a line separating them. Separates what's called fugitive emissions from stack emissions. So stack emissions are things that come out of the top of one of those smokestacks. The idea of using a smokestack is to get it high enough in the atmosphere that it mixes high up, and by the time it gets back to the ground, it's dilute enough that it's not causing a problem. It works reasonably well until you get a mix down that's not supposed to happen. Fugitive emissions, on the other hand, are things that are emitted at ground level. So they're leakage from equipment, they're spills, they're stuff from the tank. So those are things that are already at ground level, which is where we live and work and drive and hang out. And so those are the ones that, especially for the neighborhoods around the refinery, are going to be the ones that are most problematic. Fugitive emissions are going to affect farther down line. In fact, wherever the wind's blowing, by the time it mixes down, it's going to be a few miles away. So this is benzene emissions through 2014. I have a few dots and lines connecting it because I want to make the point that we have been hearing a lot, at least in my field, people talking about health impacts from Marcellus shale extraction and all the health impacts from that. I want to just put on a sense of scale what PES is compared to Marcellus shale. Marcellus shale covers roughly half to 2/3 of the state in terms of land area, and PES is a point source. So if half of the emissions of Marcellus in 2014 are coming from a point source versus 2 times that covering 2/3 of the state, you're really talking about massive, massive health implications from a point source versus a large area source. So I'm going to throw up some other aromatic species. All these aromatic species are known carcinogens. Toluene is slightly modified benzene. Ethylbenzene is a slightly more modified, and xylene is a little bit different. Chemically, they're very similar, and the total amounts are a little bit less. And again, the black lines with the dots are in comparison to Marcellus. So we're talking about some pretty huge emissions, and these again are estimates, and I don't really trust estimates because I'm a measurement person and I don't like estimates. So this is probably the best case scenario, in my opinion. It's probably worse than that because we don't maintain equipment as well as we should, and we certainly don't always report things when they go bad. I also want to make the point that this isn't just a localized South Philadelphia thing. This is also something that we need to think about from a regional perspective. these emissions get into the air and they go downwind. The prevailing wind direction, this is 10 years of meteorological data. The length of the pie is the kind of fraction of the time it comes from that particular wind direction. So you can see there's really not much wind that goes this way. Most of the wind is coming in some kind of westerly fashion, sometimes from the south, sometimes from the north. But a lot of the time we're getting wind direction this way. So I did a quick calculation, knowing that things react in the atmosphere to form ozone, to form particulate matter. You know, in 30 miles, you're still in Philadelphia city limits. How much of that benzene has reacted? How much of that toluene has reacted? How much of that ethylbenzene or xylene has reacted? And you know, a pretty significant fraction has. And every time they react, they make some ozone or some particulate matter. And so downwind of the refinery, not necessarily in the exact neighborhoods where you're getting the primary emissions, you're getting what we call secondary emissions. You're getting the ozone formation and the other things farther downwind. So other neighborhoods, not just South Philadelphia, really should care about this too. And this is something that shouldn't just be a South Philadelphia thing. This really should be all of Philadelphia caring about this.
Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely.
Going back to what I was talking about earlier about Marcellus compared to Philadelphia refinery, when we think about public health, you know, I'm not a public health expert, but we think about population exposures. And so the exposure is how many people are there, what is the concentration of the pollutant, that's your population exposure, right? So we have a massive population density in Philadelphia. Population in Marcellus Shale area is pretty small, but the refinery is right here. So we have that point source hitting just a massive population. And so we really need to think about the public health impacts and where we're really directing our attention as a community in terms of understanding what's the biggest bang for your buck in terms of protecting the most people that we can with public health. So I'm going to talk now, what I've talked so far about are mostly estimates of emissions from inventories, emissions inventories, toxic release inventories. I want to talk about measurements now. This is what I really care about in terms of cross-checking that emissions data. What do the publicly available measurements tell us? What can we learn? So this is data from Philadelphia Air Management Services. This is 1 year, 2 years of data of particulate matter. And what I've done is I've graphed it versus wind direction. So when wind is coming from north, east, west, south, west, or back to north, and what is the wind speed? Where do we get the highest concentrations of particulate matter? And this is from the lab measurement site that's kind of in the middle of Philadelphia. And what you can see is the red, which is the highest concentration on average, comes from somewhere between south and west. If we look at where that is in relation to the map of the measurement, somewhere between south and west is really the Delaware River corridor, which isn't just the refinery, it's also the airport, the other refinery. It's the industrial facilities in Chester that Dr. Howard mentioned as well. So we can't really specify that all of that stuff is coming from the refinery, but we certainly know that when the wind is coming from that direction, that's when we have the highest concentrations, and also typically at the lower wind speeds when we have the highest concentrations. PS, as I mentioned, operates 2 different monitoring sites. They post the data online. In my 15 years of looking at air pollution data, sharing data with people, downloading data, it is the hardest data to work with. They put it in a PDF. I don't know if you guys, I don't know how many people work with data, but it's not even it's not in a spreadsheet, it's not documented. It's a PDF which you have to basically cut and paste into a text file. They have random words in it. At some point they switch from a 24-hour clock to an AM PM clock. It's basically, if you had a checklist of all the wrong things to do when sharing data with people, they've checked every single one.
Do you think that's done purposely so that people can't track it?
So they contract out the monitoring. So I don't know where the they is in that.
Okay.
But whoever's doing the monitoring and then the upload, it's not done in a way that makes the data accessible. And it might be following the consent decree legally, but it's certainly not following the spirit of the consent decree. Okay, so the monitoring locations are also not ideal. And the instruments, I noticed some problems. One of the instruments that was really frustrating Turns out that they eventually figured out that there was a problem and it got fixed, but they lost a year of data. So if you look at the VOC data that we only have now from January to May, we can start to do the same thing that I showed you before and try to understand where are the highest concentrations and where are they coming from. Now VOC data, this includes methane, which unfortunately is going to be the dominant chemical and isn't necessarily bad for your health, but it does tell us where it's coming from. So again, this is from the upwind site, which apparently is located here. If you look at where the highest concentrations are, it's at the lowest wind speeds, the orange and the red colors, and it's in between the south and west vector again. So that's again coming from kind of this location. This is the major activity for most of the refinery. So we can again see in that data set that that location has the highest concentrations. And so for the people who live in the neighborhoods, when the wind is coming from the southwest vector at low wind speeds, these are the times when you're probably going to have the strongest smells and the highest concentrations. If you look at the other site, which is over here, the southwest still has some concentration increases, but not as much as the other site. So their downwind site is actually lower concentration VOC than the upwind site. They also clearly are not doing a very good job doing quality assurance of the data because those points shouldn't exist. There really shouldn't be any points below roughly 2 parts per million in concentration because methane is included in this measurement and that's globally 2 parts per million and it doesn't get lower. So again, the key take-home point for the people who live especially in the area at low wind speeds, wind coming from the southwest, might be best to try to stay indoors and keep the windows closed. Particulate matter also gets elevated at some times. This is particulate matter data from the refinery. The downwind site actually has higher concentrations for this period in December 2015. If you look at measurements made at by the Philadelphia Air Management Services, they actually track the upwind site. And so for some reason, that downwind site was having pretty significant elevated concentrations for several days at a time. And it's not clear why, but that's somewhere in the data. I find the lack of measurements somewhat annoying. And as a professor who has to teach a class on environmental measurement, I took the opportunity to use some of the other partnerships that I have in University City. So we have a partnership with the PENS program in environmental humanities, Bartram's Gardens, and we have access to the river, which is actually the closest you can get to the middle of the refinery on a public waterway. So we get boats from Bartram's. We have measurements, instruments from my lab. Now, these are all battery-powered things that I'm willing to take into a canoe and really hope they don't get wet and die. But I took a class out this last spring and made measurements up and down the river a couple times. We want to do more of that this summer. I'm actually borrowing some additional equipment from some companies who are willing to lend it to me, knowing full well that I'm taking it onto the river. And we want to do that not only from the river, but also from the neighborhoods. And that's something that I wanted to also talk to some of the folks here about where should we go in these neighborhoods? Where do you have the highest smells? Just wanted to give you a quick video, I'm running out of time, of some measurements we did by boat. These are methane measurements, borrowing an instrument from a company. So this is the refinery from one of the, it's a time-lapse video I put together from basically right here, I believe. There's a little mooring station. And you can look at the concentration of methane above the background level and kind of, you'll see right when we get near the main refinery complex, kind of peak right there. And so we can actually use these measurements, use the GPS that we're taking coincident with the measurements to identify where these plumes are and understand where then, with the wind direction, with the concentrations, with these high-speed, reasonably accurate measurements, where things are. And so that's one of the things my group is doing, and one thing we'd like to partner with. So we have more measurements planned, not only boat-based, but also from neighborhoods, as I mentioned. And so if anyone wants to, go kayaking with us and get down the river and smell it from the water, you're welcome to. And I really would like to reach out to the community and ask the people who live around the refinery where we should go. Where are the places that you smell things? Where is the worst smell coming from? Where are the people who seem to have the biggest health problems? So we can try to measure and figure out what it is that you guys are being exposed to. So we know that PS is the largest stationary source in Philadelphia for nearly all of the regulated pollutants. emission inventories, while instructive, really don't give you the true concentrations that people are breathing on a day-to-day basis or at a minute-to-minute basis. And so we need to have measurements there to better quantify those emissions and better understand the impact on people's health, on the environment, et cetera. And so one of the things that I'm really looking forward to trying to do is do more air pollutant measurement data to inform health studies, policy decisions, and regulation enforcement. So thank you for having me. And